This story begins for me on November 12th, 1981. It was a typical chilly November night here in central Illinois, and although I was not the happiest of persons in the world at that time of my life, nevertheless, that night nothing in particular was bothering me. However, I couldn't sleep. I just became increasingly restless as time passed. Finally, it got so bad I got out of a warm bed and went prowling around the cold house. I was just so restless. The next thing I remember, I found myself standing stock still in front of an upstairs window, staring at an ethereally beautiful white light that was hovering outside the house. There was a moment that I thought perhaps it was a lovely star refracting the light like a diamond, and yet I knew it was too big and too close to be that kind of celestial object. The mental part of me kicked in. Let's see, we're 6 miles from the airport. We're on a flight path here. Perhaps it's an incoming flight of some sort. But it wasn't flying. It was just hovering. And because of the luminosity, I couldn't see the outline of the craft in particular. I was only aware of this glorious white light. But I did know it wasn't like any of the aircraft that we know. The next thing I remember was that I was extremely cold and my knees were painfully stiff. I'd been standing there, I didn't know how long, and all I felt was a peace and tranquility and serenity that's indescribable. You know how you feel after you see a great movie, like, oh, wow, wasn't that wonderful? And you get up and you leave the theater. Well, this is how I was feeling. I moved my knees, finally. I flexed my knees and rubbed my arms to get the circulation going, and I trundled off to bed like a little kid. And I didn't even notice whether the white light was still there or not. I just felt so wonderful. And I went to sleep so securely, and I forgot about the whole thing. Completely forgot about it. Until about, I think it was 4 days later, it was November 16th, when a local columnist who was kind of famous for his sarcasm wrote an article because a couple of teenagers had been bugging him to do it. They had seen this UFO, or UHO, this hovering object, that very same night, and they wanted him to write about it. Well, he wrote about it, and he did a real job on their reputations, too, let me tell you. They were probably sorry that they asked him to do it. But he gave their names and addresses, and from the addresses, I could confirm that this was in my neighborhood. And from the date, I knew it was the same site on the same night. And I was so excited. Suddenly I remembered it. I remembered the whole incident. And I ran to the phone to call him and say, hey, those kids aren't making up a story. I saw it too. But he wasn't in. And I turned to my journal instead, and I wrote down the details that I remembered, which weren't actually many. There was just the beauty and the serenity, and that's about all. At this time in my life, there was no context for interest in anything like UFOs. I mean, if anybody had asked me if I thought there was life on other planets, I think I would say, well, yes, I doubt very much if we're the only living beings in all of creation. That seems highly illogical, that we're the only ones. But it wasn't a particular interest of mine. Well, not being a particular interest, life went on, and I kind of forgot about the whole incident other than it was in my journal. But something else happened, something different. I began hearing music. I would lay in bed at night, and suddenly I would hear these ethereal melodies And I would wonder which of our neighbors would be playing this odd, lovely music in the middle of the night. One time I even got out of bed to look around, but it was all dark and quiet outside. Obviously the music was in my head. One melody in particular that I now call Love and Trust just wouldn't leave me alone. Finally, I jumped out of bed one night. All right, I'll write it down. I've got to get this out of my head. Well, I wrote down the words. That was easy. But I didn't know how to write music at all, and I still don't. I put a series of dots above the words, like follow the bouncing ball type thing. A dot high up for a high note and low down for a low note. So a sequence of dots was my musical notation system. I guess I need to share with you that my only background in music was as a drummer in school. And drum music, I didn't even read that very well, even though it's all on one line. It was kind of embarrassing hanging around with other musicians in the band who knew scales and chords and keys and all that sort of thing, and I never did know any of that. I did pick out a few tunes on the piano by ear when I was highly motivated in junior high school, but that process was highly unsatisfactory because if I forgot one note while I was playing, then the whole composition would disintegrate and I'd have to start all over, and I never could sing while I played. So needless to say, in my adulthood, playing music was of no interest to me. I may have had a latent talent, but I had no ability to read music. When all of this began, there wasn't an instrument in my house, and like I said, there was no interest. But the music kept coming, and I made notations in my journal. In 1982, I received a small Casio keyboard from my sister. She's more musically inclined than I am, and she was trading that in on a better model. And my mom suggested, well, why don't you give it to Connie or maybe her daughter? They might enjoy it. And Mom would compensate my sister, for the trade-in value. So I received this little keyboard, and wow, I started pecking out that melody that I had heard, the first one after the sighting. First right hand, then left hand. I still couldn't sing, but it was kind of adventuresome to do that. But on the other hand, I wasn't sure I could justify spending time doing this. With all the daily responsibilities we have, the mundane things and the urgent things, it seems kind of unproductive to sit around with a little keyboard and peck out songs. So I wasn't sure whether this was such a good thing or not, but at least the music was indeed lovely. The next thing that happened was an Indian medicine man entered my life. He's a full-blood chief, a full-blood Navajo chief and medicine man. He works as an itinerant worker, as a spiritual service to his tribe, and he sends back money to his people. And so when I knew him, he was working in a factory with my neighbor. And when he was visiting my neighbor, we became acquainted, and we took to each other immediately. And for some reason, I ended up telling him about that white light on that night and about the music. And he simply nodded his head in total understanding, and he said, "Me see them too. Me see them hover and dive over Sacred Lake." That was a wonderful confirmation that this weird thing in my life at least had reality to some other human being. However, there was something else that was unusual in my life at this time now. I began having fantastic dreams of flight. In these dreams, I would find myself in tightly enclosed and highly efficient and highly technological spaces, zooming through space. I found myself piloting these wonderful little craft, and I found myself being a wonderful pilot. I was navigating magnetic fields in space, and I understood navigational terms and piloting terms and things that I'm absolutely not conversant with in my everyday life. And then I would wake up, and I think as I indicated to you, this was not the happiest time in my life. If I can throw in some personal information here that is relevant. I was married with a child, and I wasn't getting along with my husband at the time, and the emotional state was pretty negative at that time. And our little girl brought us a great deal of pleasure, and I'm very grateful for that. But generally, I was not happy with myself or my marriage or my life. And so these ecstatic dreams of flight and glory and competence and efficiency during the night contrasted rather painfully with my emotional mess during the day. And so the dreams in a way were kind of a burden. Sometimes the ecstasy would linger with me, but then when I would compare it to everyday life, it would be somewhat of a burden. And yet I kept hearing music. And I would find myself sometimes sitting up very late at night, right hand, left hand, putting this music together. And then all of a sudden, I started to sing. I mean, the words were there. The words were there to the music, but I had never, in my best experimentation in junior high school on a piano, I had never been able to play and sing at the same time. I just couldn't handle it. If I started singing one note, my fingers forgot their path on the piano. So I had no hope of ever doing that, and the fact that I had words to these songs seemed pretty irrelevant to me. I thought, I'm going to have to get somebody to sing them if this is going to go forward. And but I didn't have any serious thoughts about sharing the music. It just seemed like a weird hobby at this point. But here I was one night, up late, compulsively playing the music, and I broke through singing at the same time I was playing. And gosh, that sounds like such a common thing. So many wonderful people who are musicians do this and do it beautifully all the time. But for me, it had been previously an impossibility. And suddenly here I was in the middle of the night with a lovely song and words, and the ability to play, and the ability to sing. I know I've told people before that I think I know how Helen Keller felt when she first began to speak, when she made the breakthrough in communication, because I never dreamed that I would ever be able to do such a beautiful thing. I'm not saying that I did it well, but I did it. And it felt lovely. Well now, so here I am playing and singing innocent, lovely songs. But what should I do about that? There was, again, no context in my daily life for this sort of thing. I finally decided to share this with a few friends, and it was a disaster. The minute they sat there and looked at me with great interest, and I tried to play, my hands trembled so badly I couldn't finish the song, and I could hardly sing at all. So I was very embarrassed, and I thought, oh, this is stupid. I don't even know why I even bother doing this. But, you know, we survived those little humiliations, and fortunately I didn't throw the keyboard away, although I felt like it, and I persisted. And I thought, well, if I can just do it for myself, and sometimes for my daughter, and sometimes for my then husband, maybe that's what it's supposed to be for. They do seem to enjoy it. I was able finally to share a few songs with my family, and they were amazed, because they remembered what a klutz I was from before. And so I felt heartened by that at least it had some function. A few close people to me were enjoying it, and with that purpose in mind, I was in less of a conflict about it. Well, time passed, and according to the course of things, I was divorced in 1986, and that was good for all concerned. We all agree on that now.